Welcome to the Rich, Young, and Powerful podcast. This is the place where we help average givers become everyday philanthropists. I'm your host, Andrew McNair, a financial commentator, author, nine-figure wealth manager, and philanthropist too. I'm going to show you how to give more, how to find more fulfillment, and help you impact the causes that you care about the most. Because when a giver gives more, they receive and become more. And today I'm really excited about spotlighting a special organization that's doing really great work abroad. Brian Orme is the acting chief executive of Global Christian Relief, or GCR. Brian leads the organization dedicated to supporting persecuted Christians worldwide. And so he's ensuring that they can be a light for the gospel in their local communities. So that's something I feel really strongly about. And so I'm really glad to learn more about this organization and share it with you. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Andrew. I'm so excited to be with you and excited for our conversation ahead.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I wanted to first start off for those who have never heard about the organization. If you would give us a little bit about the history. I heard about this book, The God Smuggler, before, and I know Brother Andrew that wrote that is some way a part of the history of this organization. So if you can lay out the history and how it began, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I would love to. So, to give you kind of start where we're at right now and go backwards, we're currently Global Christian Relief, an independent organization who is serving persecuted Christians around the world, really, like you said, empowering them to be a light for the gospel in their communities. Before this is about 2.5 years now, but before this, we were part of the Open Doors International Network. And Open Doors is an excellent organization as well, too, and we're proud to be formally affiliated with them. And so we had our start with them and then became independent as an organization that works solely, builds our own field networks, all of those things together in the last couple of years. So yeah, it was a step over. So a lot of people still know Open Doors and they're getting to know Global Christian Relief. Both still exist and both are great organizations doing good work among the persecuted.
Well, thanks for sharing that history. I was watching some of your videos about the persecuted Christians in Pakistan and India. And so how has your heart changed as you've visited them personally, these persecuted Christians, in some of the most difficult parts of the world? How's that affected you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a background in ministry, so I was somewhat aware of persecuted church and the stories that go through, but wasn't really deep into it. And when I started about 8 years ago with GCR, like connecting to the stories did something unique to expand my faith and enrich my faith. And really, so many people that work with us that connect with the persecuted church share that same kind of same sentiment that their faith changed in unexpected ways. They were encouraged, very similar to as we give, as you talk about often. It changes us. It's not just for the person you're giving to, the recipient. It's for the giver. And I feel the same way with the persecuted church. Is the more we're engaged, I feel like it almost unlocks another element or another dimension of our faith that we might not have even known that was there, and solidifies our love and joy for the kingdom and the gospel. And there's a lot of stereotypes about persecution where people don't want to step into it because it feels dark, it feels hard. And what we try to tell them is like the surprising piece of that is kind of like as God did often in his or Jesus did often in his parables, kind of subverted things, is that it's just that way. When we engage the stories of the persecuted, we find joy, we find stronger courage, we get so much out of it as well too. Because I really do believe it's in the DNA of every believer to care for the suffering body. And when we do that, something beautiful happens.
I can only imagine the experiences you have seen and witnessed personally, and it was just really fascinating. I encourage others to check out those videos of what's going on in countries like North Korea. And here in a first world where again we may find some challenge to our faith from now and then. It may sound awkward when we try to share the gospel, but can you share with the level of persecution that is happening right now, and in what areas that you think people need to know about?
Yeah, I would love to. It's really interesting because we go back to the book of Acts and you see some really, I mean, like the persecution there, that God used that persecution to scatter the church, spread the gospel. But in many ways, the book of Acts is still happening today in places like India and Pakistan and North Korea, Iraq, and just so many places across Middle East, even in Latin America as well too. But these are places where believers are under threat, under violence sometimes because they desire to follow Jesus. So an example might be just in this last fall, I was in the Punjab region of India where the major religion there is Sikh. And there's a believer who left the Sikh community, or a Sikh who left the community to follow Jesus, started a church. His name was Pastor Kumar. But what happens often is they're seen as someone who's actually bringing danger or risk, or just pushing out. Like there's a territorial vibe to that when somebody grows something that's outside of the original religion there. And so Sikh extremists came to his house and tried to kill him with swords. He put up his hands above his head to block those swords. Was able to escape. God gave him a way to escape. Then tried to get to a hospital, but 3 hospitals turned him away because of his Christian faith. Finally gets to a hospital that will treat him. Our team was there to help him get that medical care and to pay for that. But I sat with him across from him as he kind of showed me his hands, the scars on his hands from the attack. And it's just amazing to think through, like, oh, he went through all of this. And when I ask him, Pastor Kumar, what gives you the strength to stay? He goes through that, the passage that God's grace is sufficient for him in his weakness. And he has such a desire to love and to share this good news with other people in his community that he's willing to stay there even under that kind of threat. And it's not over for him. He's still in that community, still doing that work, still under threat. But because of his great love for the kingdom, because he found that great pearl, or the pearl of great price, he's not willing to give it up.
Wow, what a story. And so, can you unpack how GCR comes along a persecuted Christian and aids them? What does that look like? I know it probably, has to be this relationship that you're building with these local Christians in their community, and you're probably serving them in different ways. So, can you kind of share with us the diversity of the aid that you supply to them?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's one of those things where we work directly with leaders on the ground. Most of the time it's church leaders to understand the context, the needs. Like you said, every region there's a little bit of a different. In India, it's a lot of Hindu nationalism. In Pakistan, it might be just the political oppression and the societal oppression. In Nigeria, it's Islamic extremism pushing through from the north to the south. So lots of different needs, and they vary quite a bit. And again, like in China, working with the underground church, or North Korea, so sensitive as well. So we work with the church leaders, or sometimes underground church leaders, if it's in Afghanistan or places outside of North Korea, and find out exactly what they need. And so we are sending in the aid or the resources that they need, which could range from Bible distribution. Many of these persecuted believers don't have access to Bibles, so we'll send Bibles across the world. We step in with trauma counseling, many of them, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And I was in Nigeria this past fall as well, too, meeting with women who'd been abducted by Boko Haram. They've been attacked, abused, all in the kind of the name of forcing them to try to deny their faith, and they refuse to deny it. Eventually they escape or are released and get free, but they're left with nothing. So helping with income generation projects to give them a way to take care of their children. Many times the husbands have been killed, giving them trauma counseling, medical attention as well too, from all the things that they've been through. So it's a wide range. And even in North Korea, sometimes it's of those who escape, we're helping with safe houses, because once they get into China and places like that, they're still under threat and could be deported back, and so need that help. So it ranges across regions depending on that need. And in fact, one of our teams just got back from Mexico, in a very rural place where they're helping, again, distribute Bibles, and seeing the impact of those Bibles to these believers. And some of these believers can't read, so they come from really poor communities. So audio Bibles is what we serve them in their own language. And to hear someone, or to watch someone receive a audio Bible player and hear it in their own language, is a really unique joy too. But yeah, our services range with whatever's needed, and sometimes it's emergency relief as well too. If there's attacks in places like Jaredwala, Pakistan, a couple years ago, or in Manipur, India, when the church is under attack, it's for us to be there on the ground to meet the needs of just survival as well.
And I'm just interested, and this is not something I even prepared to ask, but how has that changed with the politics within that country, but also the geopolitical differences when we have different administration changes and they have administration changes? How has that helped, hurt, and what have you seen, and what trends are you seeing?
Yeah, you know what? I will say this, Andrew, it's really fascinating, because I think we look at things from a Western lens, and
Sure.
our brothers and sisters in Christ look at things, from like their Middle Eastern lens. Like, so hearing, it was so interesting. And aside from political spectrums, like, I'm often surprised when I ask people from Egypt or from Iraq or from Nigeria about what they think about American politics, because it's always surprising to me. But I think they are looking for a strong leadership here in the U.S. that will help negotiate peace and give them more freedom in places like, again, Nigeria and Egypt and Iraq and Iran and places like that too. So it's interesting. Sometimes it clashes, and I would say it's hard. And there's a little bit of like going into it where they already have a view of us as Westerners as someone who's created more harm than good. And so we need to kind of get by that to say like we are brothers and sisters. We want to help, and here's what this looks like. But it's I would just say this. It's really interesting. I was with this is just a side note. I was in Nigeria during the election for us this past year, and sitting with one of the bishops from the Catholic diocese in Jos, and he was very excited that Trump was elected as president, and just interesting because he looks at it as a strong government and a strong leader that might be able to help them in some ways in Nigeria to get something done. But it was very surprising because oftentimes we would look at that and think they would see in and feel negative about that. So again, that's not a political statement of a good or bad for whoever. It's just interesting to know the dynamics. It was surprising to me to hear him, like he was excited as we sat in his office to pray before we went out to kind of do our work in the field. But it's really interesting, and it's contextual on every region and how they look at things. And again, like what our leadership might do to help them have more freedom.
Yes, and I think we just take it so much for granted, our freedom of religion and to be able to express that religion in our faith. And oftentimes that can lead to this complacency that you think, well, maybe, if something changed politically for them, or maybe if something changes politically here, then maybe our politicians will be able to create more freedom abroad. And that's not always the case. And nor should we put our faith in politicians to be able to help these persecuted Christians. So how can we go to the only one that can help in prayer and pray for the work that y'all are doing?
Yeah, I think and you're right. It's critical for us to know that God is the only one who can change things. He can, has the hearts of leaders in his hands. And I also believe that it's the local communities of believers that we're asking, that we're partnering with to make those changes. And so I would say this, like the prayers, we believe firmly in the power of prayer for the persecuted. And we often say that as your first step is just engage with the stories, look at the news and through the lens of the church and how they're experiencing this. Step into it in prayer, just ask God to work. But if you could just begin praying, again, you could take India, for example. Our brothers and sisters there, it's the most populous country in the world, but especially in different states and rural regions, they're experiencing extreme persecution from family if they leave the Hindu faith and follow Jesus, and also from the community, especially in rural places. So if you just began and said, I'm going to pray for the underground church in India, or not for the underground, but for the growing church in India. And I'm going to pray for pastors and leaders to get trained so the church will be strong, and pray for courage for them to be able to withstand all of these attacks from mobs and from community leaders and from village leaders. And again, if you pray for that daily, it's going to change you, but it's so critical because we know, like you said, that God is the one who can make these changes. It's not up to political leaders. We want to obviously vote in a way that will have benefit for the church, but the biggest thing we can do is just pray. And I would just say, looking at the news, the global news, through the lens of the global church, and asking God, how can we pray to increase, to give more freedom, and to let the kingdom grow in these areas that are really at risk.
Yes, I think we underestimate, the power of prayer. And if you look at the track record of God intervening to King Xerxes and Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, like God has a great track record of changing the minds of leaders. So I think it's smart for us to pray for Xi Jinping and pray for Putin, pray for Donald Trump, and pray for all the leaders that we have in these various countries, especially the persecuted church in the Maldives and in North Korea, and especially in those countries, that they would see visions, they would see change, that people in their close-knit community would become believers, because it can change an entire country's path towards freedom of expression of their faith. So we should never underestimate prayer. But I do want to talk about practical ways that people can get involved with GCR's activities and what they're doing.
Yeah, no, would love to. And I think, again, prayer is where it starts. The next part is mobilizing our resources. And I would say that the interesting thing, the way that we look at it, is that the persecuted church, they're positioned in places that many instances, missionaries can't even engage. So it's the local underground church working with believers in the underground church in Afghanistan. We're not going to send over, missionaries, to Afghanistan outrightly. There might be some secretly going, but to mobilize our resources again. God has blessed us here in the West. Even when we look at our own wealth, like you compare that to others, the poorest of the poor in Pakistan, and we have so much. And I think it's the ROI on giving to the persecuted church is astronomical. And I'll give you an example. In Pakistan, we're working with believers in the lower caste system who are being discriminated against through bonded slavery. And so they have no skill sets beyond brickmaking, things like that. They go into a situation where they might have a medical cost, or they have an accident, or even they're being taken advantage of by a neighbor, things like that, and they don't have the means to fight it in court. So they go and take out a loan, and this loan can put them in debt and in bonded slavery. The whole family becomes part of this unit for decades. And typically the average debt is around $800, and it could keep them in this place as slaves for 20 plus years. And if it's not paid off, it gets passed on to the children. So the next generation have it. So we're working with partners in the region to relieve these debts, to provide income generating potential and training for families so that they can have a different skill set and start growing outside of that in financial literacy training, which is critical for those who are the poorest of the poor, have never had resources to think about planning ahead and to think about the biblical principles of storing up and saving and things like that. Are just when they hear those and learn them, it's amazing to see the results of that. But we're watching Christian families, the bondage being broken and the cycle of poverty and discrimination being broken, for them to be set up on their own, again, with $800 to $1,000 to change the future generations of a Pakistani Christian family, to empower them, to me is like the return on investment to that is amazing. And anyone, I think it can save up and do that, or have a part, even if they just give a small portion to that. And it's powerful to see.
I mean, so powerful. I mean, you think $800 is what some people's mortgage payment, rents are, less than that for many people. Their mortgage payments double that, triple that. And you think that $800 could set a family in bondage for 2 or 3 decades. And that's what I think frustrates me for the uneducated who reference, karma. They're getting, what goes around comes around. It's like, you have no idea what karma does and caste systems do that lock generations in it. And that just shows the lack of education we have to other people's beliefs. And I think you bring up a really solid point that we think, well, we'll just send missionaries. I want to go as a missionary. Well, the issue is a lot of times, and it's great that we are sending missionaries here in North America, but the issue is we're oftentimes going to where the church already is. We're going to where there's already Christ being shared. There's already multiple churches, but going into those unchurched places, going to those places where you will actually be persecuted, can only be done by the people of that country, because you can't just walk around with a translator, handing out Bibles. That's not going to work in Iran. And
No.
so I think that we need more and more education. So can you just share with us maybe the 10 top countries that y'all are working through right now? And one more time, how believers and people listening to this show can actually give, and what are the methods for them to do that as efficiently as possible?
Yeah, I would love to. So some of the bigger countries that we're working in 20 plus countries around the world, and it fluxes and grows depending on the needs with that. But India is a big one. Persecution is intense there, and it's increasing ever since Modi came into office in 2014. And right now we're seeing it's just skyrocketing. Huge needs in India. Pakistan is another one, trying to lift up and empower the Christian community there to have a voice. Nigeria is another one, again, working in the northern region, mainly with those who've been displaced by extremists and have been left with nothing, to try to give them hope, education, trauma care, and many times just enough to survive right now. So Nigeria would be another one. Iraq is also one. And so working with Christian communities there, but also doing a lot of Bible distribution in the regions that we're working in. So it's a more of a secretive work there. So I met a couple years ago with some of our secret Bible printing presses that moves locations. But in Iraq, they're doing incredible work to service the underground church with Bible distribution there. You've also
I
got
would like to
places.
just stop
Yeah.
with
Oh,
India
sure.
and
Yeah.
Pakistan for just a second and think about the leverage of your gifts. Like, we want to help our local community and some of the great communities around us, but it's again about leveraging our dollar to the most ability. And Jesus talked about this. Jesus was not silent on how we should give and to get the most out of our gifts. Like, again, there's always going to be the poor, and they're going to be throughout the world, but it's really sad when we can give exponentially our dollar difference between our dollar and the Indian currency. Plus, think about how many people are in just between Pakistan and India, where you have what, one fifth of the population, maybe.
Yeah.
So we can leverage our gifts and our offerings in a huge way, just with those top three countries you were mentioning.
Yeah, and a couple of things with that is, again, like, our dollar stretches so far. So the needs in, working with a young church leader in India who, maybe came to faith a couple years ago and is trying to shepherd his church, but he needs training, needs resources, might even need some kind of income because the church is too poor to pay for him to do something. So he's bivocational already, but trying to pour his life into that. And the amount to help them out on a monthly basis is so small. And yet it has such a wide ranging impact as well. And I will reverse back to what you said right there, because I get this question often where people say, hey, we have needs right here in the US. Why would you look elsewhere? Like, why would you focus? We need to focus here. And I'll say this, like, I always say, like, this isn't an either or. So when you come to giving, it's not like we're saying, hey, just give internationally and forget about, local issues. Like, we feel like, yes, if God's laid it on your heart to give to local, needs, give to local needs, but it doesn't have to be an either or. It can be a both
I
and.
mean, look at Paul's example. I mean, sometimes when people say, give to the United States, give locally to the community, of course, it's an and, but you're planted there. Your feet, your physicality is already there. Like, you're
Yeah.
physically there. Like, you can serve. And you can take your financial resources and give to your local church and give to places you'll probably never go, or would be in your life would be in jeopardy because of the way you look and the way they know you believe before you even open your mouth. And you can actually encourage, help those who are persecuted in other countries you'll never go. And I think that Paul is a great testimony of that, where he's raising up money for the Jerusalem church, where he may not go back because he is, again, there in Greece, in modern day Greece and Turkey. So again, there's a great examples of this throughout Acts, where we've seen those who are actually sharing the gospel in their local area, but giving to elsewhere.
Yeah. And I would say the first step for giving, our site is, globalchristianrelief.org. You can go there and find different ways to give. Again, there's a number of other great organizations in our space. So this isn't a competition. Like, we often say that the need is so great. We know there's more than 340 million Christians around the world who are experiencing not just regular persecution, but extreme persecution for their faith. And they have needs to know they're not alone. So again, we're one of many. We pray that God raises up more. Like, there could be thousands of organizations that are helping the persecuted church, and it still wouldn't be enough. So again, you could visit our site. There's others out there that you can do research on. We've mentioned Open Doors earlier as well. But I would say step in to just start giving, even make that first step. And I would also encourage you to pray to where God might be leading you to really dig deep. And so it might be a country, might be a region, might be a people group that you need to learn more about, so that you can follow along with that story, that journey, engage with their faith and the needs there, and dig in deeper. What again, whether that's India, Pakistan, Nigeria, North Korea, Nepal. There's so many, to jump into, but know what God's doing across the world, and it's going to expand your faith. But start giving to a specific region and start caring about the church there and connecting to the church there. And again, I think it will open up another gateway for your faith, for your generosity, that you will be amazed at. And when you start that step.
Certainly, one of the resources that I practice every day is I listen to Pray the Word podcast by David Platt, and he often at the end of that references a people group that
Hmm.
is right now unreached and has very few Christians there. And it really does change your heart over time where you start thinking, man, I have no problems compared to the persecuted Christians and brothers that I'm going to see in heaven in the future. And I'm enjoying my life of ease. And I just read in my Bible reading the rich man and Lazarus. And there will be a time where we will start getting context in heaven of, wow, we enjoyed all these fruits, and there's nothing wrong with being wealthy, but there is a problem with being wealthy and storing it up for our own pleasures. And
Yeah.
like Jesus said, like you had plenty, you had so much blessings during the life that again, the man Lazarus was sitting there with open wounds. I mean, there's persecuted Christians right now with open wounds that we can be giving towards and we can show our compassion to. And instead of just putting one more, boat, one more car, one more financial thing that probably won't bring us any incremental happiness. So, is there any resources that your organization has that we can be helping guide our prayers? And do you have any resources like that?
Yeah, so we have a monthly prayer calendar called the Prayer Force Alert that you can sign up for that will give you, daily prayers for the persecuted. So if you go to our website, and you'll find that on the homepage and subscribe. I would also say subscribe to just our general weekly email. And our goal is to create awareness and provide prayer direction, connect you to the stories of the persecuted. But I would say sign up for some of those resources and engage in those. Make it a regular time to pray for your persecuted brothers and sisters. We also, again, like our YouTube channel, our passion is to try to raise awareness for the persecuted, and it's very similar to the John 17 passage that Jesus prayed that we would all be one together. And so we really do believe that we should know what the church around the world is experiencing, hear about their stories, learn from their courageous faith. I think in many ways, the persecuted church can be our mentors in how we handle trials and challenges and persevere through that and bring glory to God. So there's so much to be said for engaging that. But I do think, like you mentioned, eventually every knee will bow, all the nations will come together of believers. We're going to be together worshiping the King, worshiping the Lamb. Right now, we have that potential to still have an impact with those brothers and sisters that we might never sit across from, but that we can send resources to, send prayers to let them know they're not alone. The church of Christ, the body of the Lord stands together, and we're going to do that for his glory.
Amen. I do want to talk about the perspective change that maybe you've seen in others who have witnessed persecuted Christians or yourself. What comes to mind and personally, going through some trials or some periods of valleys. How has that changed your interpretation of persecution? Like a lot of people, they say, I'm under attack, I feel persecuted, and I'm not trying to minimize people's daily struggles and mental health issues that people have. But oftentimes, I feel like when Christians say, I'm persecuted, I'm going through a tough time, it's like, well, you're going through a tough time. And I'm just using myself as an example because I might be busy trying to build my own kingdom. And there's a difference when a persecuted Christian is actually persecuted because they're trying to bring the kingdom to, they're actually being persecuted by building the kingdom that Jesus came to build. And so, how's that changed your perspective or changed others?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think, and sometimes my own struggles in my faith are because of my bad decisions too. Like I have that on myself. But I would say personally, I can share my personal journey is that I was in ministry for a number of years. I hit a lull and kind of went through a period of doubts, through a period of just like feeling separated from God, feeling like my faith wasn't vibrant and wondering if it's all real. And this was in the flux of coming to GCR, and it's so fascinating. Like I didn't expect this journey, so I know everybody has career journeys that take them different places. Was not expecting to be in this place working on behalf of the persecuted. And one of the most surprising things that did happen to me was meeting with believers like Iranian, Christians who had been imprisoned for their faith and had been praying and been in there for 2 years, trusting God. And then were released and their faith is vigorous and just everything they experienced. Or again, believers from North Korea who've been in prison because of their faith and listen to their stories of how they persevered on so little and had just memorized little pieces of scripture and had churches and outhouses because that's the only place they could do it with a few others to not be seen by the guards. All those stories in meals with with our persecuted family. Um, what they did for me was they stripped away all of the things that I kind of built around like church and Christianity and gave me that simplicity of the gospel being worth it to follow and give your life up for. And I needed to see that, and I think God knew I needed to see that firsthand to have that transformation again, to remember this faith isn't just about all these platitudes. It's not about even just a specific feeling. It's about really being willing to sell everything because we found that pearl of great price, because we found the gospel, and because we know that Jesus is worth it. And there's nothing else, you know, not the huge church experiences. It's like many of the churches I went to were, again, just in little huts or in underground rooms or in very discreet, you know, places with nothing but a few people singing quietly together. I spent some time in Iraq on the border of Iran and met with these secret believers who were distributing Bibles into the underground church into Iran. Before they left, I got to sit and have a meal with them, and they just prayed together, sang together. One of the songs they sang was had the words of "Blessed are the feet of those who bring good news." But sitting there with just some kebabs on the floor, listening to them sing and pray, like those are the things that were like, okay, this is again the heart of Christianity when everything is stripped away and you know that it's worth it to give your life for it. It changed again, it revolutioned the way that I looked at my faith, the way that I experienced God, to know that this is so much more real than have ever seen it in my life. And it's part of me now. And I think part of our goal is to, again, translate that experience of sitting in a room with your persecuted family as you're here in the US, to connect your story with theirs and to see how powerful this is, and how massive and worldwide and global and historic this movement of Christ is.
I love it. You know, because if we're not careful, we'll get lulled into a consumeristic Christian journey where, you know, we go to a church that has a coffee shop with, there's nothing wrong with some coffee and some worship, but we'll go there saying, you know, I want to be poured into. I want to be poured into. What's in it for me? Is the preacher doing a good job? Is my connect group full with people that I like to spend time with, that people that I like, and it's about my happiness and what I get out of this, versus you see the persecuted church that are actually sacrificing their lives at times, sacrificing pain and being beaten for it. And they're pushing the kingdom forward while we're just trying to build our own kingdom and make it really lavish for us and our family. And again, that's a dangerous type of faith to have. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about over and again, that, you know, people are going to say like, Lord, Lord, we knew you. And he's like, yeah, maybe you knew me, but you didn't serve me. He didn't try to disciple others, and you didn't care about these persecuted Christians that are in not a land of freedom of expression and faith, that be able to do that. And so it's not about, I'm not trying to make anyone feel guilty, but I'm trying to make us at least feel a little bit of conviction, so that we'll act, because we know that there's a need out there. We know that we actually don't have a money problem. We have a transfer problem of transferring it to those in need. So
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, are there any misconceptions that people may have about the persecuted church that you can clear up for us?
Yeah, I would love to, Andrew. I would say the first one is, you know, we're talking about the persecuted, everything that they're giving up. I mean, so much courage, so much faith within that too. But I would say this: they are not perfect. They're just like you and me, but they've been put many times in a very surreal, difficult circumstance. And what happens is it proves their faith true. So it's not like they have some superpower or they're connected to a spirit that we're not. We have the same spirit, the same Lord. And again, many of them are, they're goofy like me. They, you know, I mean, will joke around, they're having fun, or they, I mean, again, like get upset at silly little things, whatever. It's like they're just like us. They're not some superheroes. It's really God working in them to prove the faith to be true. So I would say that first of all is that they're not perfect. They're just like us, but they have a faith that's been tested. And I think in many ways, like you said, I think Satan sometimes sings a lullaby over the church here in the U.S. to kind of just pacify us into what we're doing and not remind us of the power of this faith that inhabits us through the Holy Spirit. So I think that's one, is they're not perfect. The other one is this. I think again, I said this earlier, but sometimes people think engage in the persecuted church, they're just going to see darkness, something macabre. It's going to be very difficult to engage. But again, the way that we're approaching is there's so much hope within the persecuted church, and so there's a sense of joy. I will give this example. I spent a day with in Egypt with a family of like 20 people who had lost loved ones who'd been killed on a pilgrimage to Minya to celebrate their Christian faith. They're Coptic believers, and I remember going in that day thinking this is going to be so hard, it's going to be so heavy, and almost thinking about how I will receive it. And I went there, and it was like a backyard barbecue, and they're joking, they're laughing, they're loving, they're bringing me into things, but yet they have this deep reverence for their family members that they've lost, but also are so proud to be able to say that their family members stood up for Jesus, his name, and gave their lives for him. So I left that feeling so joyful and so engaged, and felt like I had like 20 new friends in the faith, rather than going in there feeling like, oh, this is going to be like a funeral. And again, it was a year later, so it wasn't right after, but a year later. And so I think things like that is that this is not a thing that will bring you down. It's a thing that will bring you up. And like you said, this isn't a guilt trip either. It's an invitation to be a part of something bigger, to expand your faith in ways that will shake it up and give you more joy. So it's not get past that of like, oh, I don't want to engage that because I'll feel bad. You will see incredible stories of hope that will drive you and give you great joy.
Oh, that's exciting. If you could maybe narrow it down to a single message that if you could put it in everyone's feed, everyone's X, and this got sent out, what would be a single message to maybe the church as a whole? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think I would start by just saying today, this period with the persecuted church is critical for us to let them know they're not alone. So do something, do whatever you can, you mean to pray or to give, to step into their stories and to strengthen the church, the global church, to expand the kingdom. So I would just say that it's a critical time we're in right now. It's unprecedented, the type of persecution we're seeing, but also equally the growth in the church. And God often uses that persecution. So it's almost in tandem. The persecution is pressing in, and Satan's doing his work, but God is doing his work, and he's pressing in and growing the kingdom. And so don't miss out on your chance to be a part of this global story. Step into that story through prayer, through giving today, and see what difference it makes.
I think you're spot on. I mean, if we go back to Acts, and as you said, that the story of Acts is still playing out. If you go back to the first century church, they were heavily persecuted, and the way was heavily persecuted, but also so generous and so sacrificial. And I love the line, it's often missed and read right over. They were so generous and so sacrificial that it made the Romans confused.
Hmm.
Like they're taxing and oppressing non-believers, but they were seeing this way that was so sacrificial with their belongings and the wealth that they had, what little wealth they oftentimes did have, that they were set on spending their life, their health, their physical health, as well as their financial health towards this cause. And that can happen today. And that's the beauty of sharing about an organization like yours, that we can get involved. We can be so sacrificial that our friends, the US government, wherever we live, gets so confused. Like, why are they so generous towards this cause in North Korea, which they'll never see a benefit of? And that's what the Christian faith is all about, is pouring ourselves, because we've been poured into, with salvation. So can you one more time share the website where people can go to give and find out more information?
Yes, for sure. Please go to globalchristianrelief.org. And on our homepage, there's a number of, of opportunities for you to give and partner with the persecuted church in places like India and Pakistan and Nigeria that we've named a few. And India is our focus right now. So we're really trying to stand with our brothers and sisters in India, sharing the stories. The next thing I would say is please subscribe to our email newsletter to stay in touch with the stories and prayer needs. Again, we try to make it valuable to engage you and connect you as well. And I would also just encourage you to our about pages there. You can read more about us. You can look at our financial statements as well too, and our annual report, which we just released, which we'd love for you to read through. There's some great stories of faith, but you can also understand more about the transparency of our organization and the mission behind it as well too. But yeah, please visit our site, download those pieces, read the About Us page, and check us out.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm glad you highlighted the transparency of the organization. I think, we all work so hard for the resources we have, and we want to see them exponentially leveraged for the gospel and in an efficient manner. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Andrew, it's been a pleasure. Really appreciate you and the work you're doing, and thanks again for the invite. It's been an honor.
Absolutely. That's all we have for this episode of the Rich, Young, and Powerful podcast. One thing that would help us both out is if you would leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, wherever you listen to the show would mean the world to me. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the episodes. Check out my book, The Giving Crisis, on Amazon, which shares my story from greedy to generous. And you can check that all out on Audible. If you don't want to read it, you can listen to it. So until next time, remember that when a giver gives more, they receive and become more. See you next time.